Hello everybody, welcome back to Reaper Minis TV. Sorry for the delay since the previous episodes. I had a rather catastrophic computer crash that just got resolved, so now we're back and here we go into some new reviews. We're going to get started with some Chronoscope reviews, and these first two we're going to look at are among my favorites for this whole episode. This first one is Sister Maria, and as you can tell, she's a nun. This comes in three different pieces. You get the base model itself, and then for her left hand, you can either get a pistol or a ruler to whack somebody on the knuckles with. Her clothing, her nun's habit, is very well done and looks like it'll paint up easily. She's got a very chubby face and an accusatory kind of pointing finger at something in the distance there. Her necklace has a crucifix on it, and she's got her rosary on her left side. Now the two weapons, well, the ruler or the pistol, I guess you could have the ruler as a weapon, they come on a separate sprue that you need to clip off and put in place. The pistol is a revolver, and the ruler even has details where, if you remember back in school where you had like a 3-ring binder and you could put your ruler in there, well, this ruler has the holes to put it in a 3-ring binder. So huge amounts of detail there that were unnecessary but nice just as an added thing to see on the ruler. Cleanup was pretty easy. There was a tiny bit of flash and a fairly faint mold line around parts of the model, so she cleaned up easy and got put together pretty quickly. She has a rather expressive or stern-looking chubby face that goes along with the pointing finger at whatever she's about to whack with the ruler or shoot with the pistol. I think she would make a marvelous Call of Cthulhu character, a player character, a nun who's just kind of been thrown into the Cthulhu mythos and trying to rationalize what's going on. So, awesome model here. This next model is called Berkeley, and she's a female zombie hunter. It's a single-piece model where she's carrying a chainsaw in both hands, but she also has a shotgun, sawn-off shotgun, on her back. There's a large knife on her right-hand side at her hip, and her clothing is torn up a little bit down by her right foot, so probably some zombie trying to claw her and gnaw away there. Like Sister Maria, I think that Berkeley would be great in a Call of Cthulhu game as long as you're playing in an era where her weaponry is going to be found. Otherwise, you could also use her in a modern D20 game or something like that. Maybe if you're doing a Left 4 Dead or Zombie Holocaust kind of game, she'd be good. Also, in a miniatures game, I could see her maybe fitting into a Pulp City game or something like that. This next girl is Raquel Blackrose. She's a buccaneer, pirate kind of model, and she's carrying a pistol in her right hand and a sword with a very wide or thick blade in her left hand. As you can see by the picture here, she needed more cleaning up than some of the other models. There was some extra flash and little bits of webbing from the casting process that needed to be cleaned up on her. It took a couple of minutes, but it really wasn't anything excessive. She's wearing a big, wide-rimmed pirate hat with big plumes or feathers on it, and from her facial expression, she looks more like the happy-go-lucky kind of pirate than the ruthless killer, in my eyes anyway. She's got normal pants on and sort of like a corset on top, so showing off some cleavage in her midsection, but nothing unreasonable or anything that you'd have to hide the kids from. The joint where her left hand and her sword come together, that wrist area right there, is a little bit weak, so you'll have to be careful that you don't put too much stress or pressure on it or move the sword around a lot, because you could very easily break that off of the model. Next up is Oyuki, and she's a geisha, and if you're thinking to yourself right now, well, how many uses do I have for a geisha model? Well, I had to do a little bit of thinking myself to find some real suitable usability for this model. But if you're playing a Legends of Five Rings game, or if you're having an Oriental or Asian flavored D&D game, she could do well in there. And also, if you're a fan of Resolution by Aberrant Games, they have a unit called Numb Sisters for the APAC faction, and they look very much like geisha. They have the fans like Oyuki does here, and I think she would be a perfect addition and add a little bit of uniqueness to an army that has her in there along with the regular Numb Sisters. Okay, we're going to move on to some Warlord models now, and starting off with the faction that hasn't even been officially released yet, but it has quickly become my favorite in Warlord, and this is the Dark Elves for Darkreach, and we're starting off with a Dark Elf crossbowman. The miniature comes in two pieces. You have the main part of the model itself from the legs up, pretty much just missing the hands and the weapon, and then the other piece, the right hand or the right arm from the elbow down, and then the left hand are cradling and holding the crossbow. That comes as a separate piece. You need to glue it into place. But it goes right into place perfectly. Didn't need any kind of adjusting or putty or anything at all. All of the pieces needed a little bit of cleaning. The crossbow itself had a few extra bits of flash here and there on it, but not really much of a mold line except on the inside of the crossbow itself. The rest of the model had a few mold lines also, but in general he cleaned up pretty quickly, and if you were going to build a unit of these, as I'm very much thinking of building or rebuilding a lot or possibly even all of my Dark Elf army for Warhammer Fantasy Battle using these miniatures, I think you could clean, prime, paint, and just have ready to go a full unit of these metal crossbowmen in probably less time than it would take you to put together the regular plastics from GW. So I'm very tempted to do this, at least with units of crossbowmen, if not possibly my whole Warhammer Fantasy Battle army, as soon as more from the Darkreach faction gets released. Until then, or maybe even in addition to then, I'll probably have a Darkreach army for Warlord that I'll be building as time goes on. So I personally have great use of all of the Darkreach models, especially the crossbowmen here. If you needed them for a D&D game where you were going to do an expedition into the Underdark or something like that, I think you could find great uses for these models also. Also from the Darkreach faction is a female Dark Elf warrior, and just from her pose alone, I love this model. She's in a very action-oriented pose where she's about to strike down with her sword that's held in her right hand. I think she would make a wonderful champion of a unit of Dark Elf warriors, perfect for a female player character for D&D or any other kind of fantasy role-playing game. You could easily use her as a regular elf instead of a dark elf, just paint her up a little bit differently. Just about the only cleaning I had to do on the model was on her right arm and the sword itself. There was a mold line that was visible, but it didn't take long to clean that up. One thing I like about most of the Darkreach models that I've seen so far, and is especially on this female Dark Elf warrior, is there's just a sense of movement to the whole model. If you can see where her cloak is flowing around, and also her hair is sort of whooshed around or whipped around to where it almost seems like she just spun around and she's ready to strike at an opponent. So a lot of animation or sense of movement to the model itself. I like it a whole lot. As I stated before, she's probably going to get dropped into a Darkreach army and a Dark Elf army for Warhammer Fantasy Battle. A lot of uses for me, but I think also a lot of uses for any kind of role-playing game where you could use her as a female elf player character model. You could obviously use her as a drow matron, something to use as an encounter against the PCs. Excellent model all around here. I like everything I've seen so far from the Darkreach faction. This next model is from another new faction in the Savage North expansion that'll come out soon for Warlord. It is from the Isingstead faction, and this is a Yeti warrior. It's a large model on a 40mm square base. It comes in 3 pieces. You have the main body and head and legs as one piece, and then both of the arms are separate pieces that need to be glued on. The arms fit up into their joints up at the shoulders pretty well, but as you can see on the back side, I could probably use a little bit of putty to fill in some small gaps. They would be visible if I didn't do something with them, so that's probably going to be on tap for me to putty in there and then try my hand at sculpting to just make a little bit of fur there with the putty, so shouldn't be too hard. The Yeti is sculpted in a very dramatic pose where both arms are reaching out like he's about to grab an opponent and just tear them to shreds with the long claws that he's got. The head or face is in a very dramatic, almost like warlike screaming appearance where his tongue is sticking out and the mouth is open, showing off all his teeth. You can just sort of imagine him roaring at an opponent before he charges in and tears him up. Now, if you have no interest in an Isingstead army for Warlord, you could use him in a cold weather encounter for any kind of role-playing game. The last model for this episode is from the Pathfinder line, and he is called the Scribbler. I really don't know why. I have to be honest, I don't know anything about the background for Pathfinder. I'm assuming he is some kind of NPC thief or something like that who earned the nickname the Scribbler by doing something horrible to people. But I don't know for sure. The Scribbler is a single-piece model where he's got a dagger in his left hand and a very large sword in his right hand, and it has a vicious-looking serrated blade on it. He's wearing a mask that covers most of his face, and the rest of his armor looks like it's cloth or furs. Nothing too heavy armor-wise, so that's also what leads me to believe he's more of a thief or rogue kind of guy. He did need a little more cleaning than some of the other models I looked at this time around. There were some more visible mold lines, some on the back of his cape, and also on the underside of his arms, so a few minutes cleaning him up before he was ready to base and prime. If you weren't going to use him in Pathfinder, I think he'd make an excellent rogue player character model, and that's probably where he'll end up for me. Alright everybody, thanks for watching this episode of Reaper Minis TV. See you next time.